Okay, so we're gonna put it all together, so to speak, right now. We talked about participants, which is the who in the dynamic. We talked about messages, which is the what. We talked about context, which is the where and the kind of setting, so to speak, but not setting like over here, just what's going on, who are we talking to, where are we physically, that's the context, okay? Then the channel is either the face-to-face or the technological route, all right? We're gonna introduce these two, but before I do that, I want you to start to kind of put this into a diagram in your mind so you get the gist for how this works. This is a process. Every process can be charted or diagrammed. You might think that the process looks something like this. Sender to receiver. The sender encodes a message and the receiver receives it. But this is not the case. This is all wrong because it doesn't take into consideration so many other factors, all right? This is a better idea for what the process looks like, okay? The sender encodes, so you could put sender out here if you'd like. The sender encodes the message, sends it through, this is a channel, and the decoder decodes that meaning, okay? Now, what this chart takes into consideration that the other doesn't is feedback, okay? When you talk to people, they don't look at you with a dead face. Usually, they're giving you facial feedback, and oftentimes, they're giving you verbal feedback, which is very useful to letting you know whether they're receiving your message successfully, okay? So this is more what the process looks like. Now this is important, and we're going to talk more about this in the nonverbal video in the coming units, but this is important because what this shows you is that you never ever stop communicating. If you think you have stopped communicating, you are definitely wrong. Dead people communicate, okay? We can communicate verbally and we can communicate non-verbally. Verbally, we understand. Words come out of our mouths and people hear us and they listen to us and they understand what they're saying and they respond to us. We understand that process a little bit more. But what we don't think about often are the nonverbals. When paramedics come to a scene, what's the first thing that they do? If someone's unconscious, they check for a pulse. A pulse means what? I'm alive, right? So the dead people communicate because they don't have a pulse, right? So we communicate all the time. If you have ever been in any kind of argument with a friend and you decided that you were going to cut off all communication, you weren't going to answer their text messages, their emails, their phone calls, what have you, or you're going to see them on the street and you're just going to keep walking. What are you communicating? You're communicating that you don't want to communicate, right? Now they can interpret that in many different ways, but essentially you're communicating that you don't want to communicate, whether you ever open your mouth or not. So it's very important that you understand the sender sends, but a decoder is not a sitting duck. A decoder is actively sending messages back to the encoder, which means a decoder is also an encoder, right? Again, we'll talk more about that in verbals and nonverbals. But the new part of this that we didn't discuss before is interference and settings, okay? Interference is best thought of as noise. Noise is in every single conversation that you have. Because we don't walk into a dialogue with nothing on our minds, because we have lives outside of every dialogue that we have, where our minds are constantly working on something, and we always bring whatever is on our minds to the table. So noise can be a psychological thing. Noise, same thing as interference, can be a psychological thing. It can also be a physical thing. If you are like me and you're sitting in a classroom and someone is doing the whole clickety-click with their pen, that is a physical noise, right? That is something that is distracting you from the dialogue that's going on, okay? And then settings is simply just referring to how many people you are talking with. So in communication, you can be talking intrapersonally, which I mentioned in the welcome message, that you can talk to yourself and it's very healthy, okay? Intrapersonal. Then you can be talking to one or two other people. That's interpersonal. Okay. And then you have a group of friends that you get together with. That's a small group. And then the big bad boy that everybody's afraid of is public or social. Okay, so that's settings. That's the format that you are having your dialogue in. That is the gist of the communication process. Okay, so there is one other part of the communication process that it is important to be aware of as a communicator and especially as a public speaker, and that is competence. How to be competent in your communication. So there are really just two factors involved in being competent. One is being effective and one is being appropriate. In order to be an effective speaker, you need to reach your goal. So you will, in this unit and the next, be thinking about your goal as a public speaker, your goal for particular topics, your goal for how you would like certain audiences to receive particular topics, and you'll be really investing in that. You'll know if you're effective if you reach that goal, okay? In an informative speech, your goal is to affect the audience in an informative way. So oftentimes your goal will start, I would like to inform my audience about blank, okay? So you'll know you're effective if your audience has been informed about blank, okay? Appropriateness is simply meeting the expectations of that audience. So, for example, I am your teacher. I'm speaking right now, so you are my audience, and in order for me to be effective, you have to learn something, right? And in order for the message to be appropriate, it has to meet your expectations. So your expectations as a student would be what? For the message to be professional, for the message to be organized, for the message to be useful, right? So these two factors, if you can get acquainted with these two factors, and you really invest in becoming an effective speaker and becoming an appropriate speaker, then you will be seen as competent.